this cybersecurity forum today here in the Huntsman School. I am Chris Corcoran. I'm department head for data analytics and information systems. I am. Thank you, but way more exciting than me, Joe McManus.
Hi, everybody.
Joe McManus is Chief Information Security Officer for Drizzly, which is a gigantic alcohol delivery company. Yeah, I was going to say it's a dry campus, so unfortunately he couldn't arrange anything for us today. But if you go across the street in the parking lot, I don't know, maybe they can deliver there. I'm going to let you say a couple things about yourself, Joe, here in a second. But Joe, I'm not exaggerating. Joe's kind of a freaking rock star, and you're going to hear a couple of interesting stories about Joe here in a second. Joe is actually he's not his name isn't in the book, but he is actually in a book that's called Kingpin. That was written several years ago about a giant credit card heist. Basically, I think up to its time, probably the biggest.
It was the largest at its time.
Yeah, hacking incident of its kind, which happened kind of like through the 2000s, but it kind of culminated around 2008 to 2010. We're going to talk about that in a second because Joe has some hair-raising stories to tell based on his experience with this incident. Now, 2 years ago, Drizzly, your chief security officer for Drizzly, but Drizzly was acquired by Uber. So tell us about that. That was 2021.
So we were acquired by Uber for the small amount of $1.1 billion. And since then, we've sort of been integrated into the system, and it's been really neat since then just to see, we were big at scale, but Uber scale's just nuts. So it's been kind of neat to see us grow, and prior to them hiring me, they had been hacked. So they brought me in to build a security program. And if you've taken IS 3800 from me, I'm pretty excited about security. So it's fun to get people to care about it. So we built security, we passed a giant FTC order, and we'll talk about some more of that later, but it's just really neat to build where there's like startups when you're building a product, you're not thinking about security. So to come back in and build all that up, pass your FTC audit, it's been a great adventure so far.
Yeah, and hopefully, regardless of what major you are, or even if you're, whether you're a data analytics information systems major or you're not, you're in accounting or finance or marketing or whatever, hopefully you get the sense that it doesn't matter what field you're in, this is critically important and more important as each year passes.
Yeah, security is everybody, right? So can I get a show of hands? Who's in the IS program? Okay, who's in the analytics program? Okay, so first off, you're all part of security. It's not one person. Like the security department over here, they don't secure the company. We've got Eric Hawley here. So it's a security group securing all of USU? No. Good. You answered right. It's everybody, right? So you're all part of it, and we'll all talk about that later, but everybody now is part of security.
Yeah, and friends and family. Eric Hawley here, the CIO, Chief Information Officer for Utah State University, is here on the front row, who teaches for us as well. So give it up for our special guest. He's usually busy in his office cleaning up the messes that students and faculty cause, so we really appreciate him being here with us.
Be Chief Integration Officer, mashups and security of data.
He has a lot of passion, so I'll just say that.
It's misguided mostly, but.
Now, let's see, you got your master's degree from Carnegie Mellon.
Yeah, I was a researcher for Carnegie Mellon University for 13 years, where I did work on behalf of the Secret Service, the FBI, the CIA, DOD, and DHS, and groups like that.
Now, Carnegie Mellon, just so that you all know, is kind of like, I would say, ground zero for cybersecurity, just research and education. Carnegie Mellon's in Pittsburgh, in case you guys don't know.
Yeah.
very renowned university, but tell us a little bit about CMU and what they do in cybersecurity, like just a brief history.
So I think it was 1986, there was the Morris worm was the first virus that sort of spread across the internet. It was a joke virus written by, at the time, the director of the NSA's son. So he didn't know if it was going to go anywhere. He wrote it, it took off, it crashed servers everywhere. And so Rich Pethia at Carnegie Mellon looked into this. They ended up finding a way to take it off the network. At the time, the network was like 200 universities. Get things fixed, and they started up CERT, the Computer Emergency Response Team. Since then, CERT was part of the Software Engineering Institute at Carnegie Mellon University, which goes back and forth between that and MIT with being the #1 computer science program in the country. And so they've dedicated essentially a national lab inside of CERT to just cybersecurity. So when I was there, we worked on the network defense for all of DoD and all of DHS. We made some really cool open source software called Silk, which is kind of neat. It monitors 14% of all internet traffic. And so it's free. You can download it yourself and install it. And so we're continually defending those networks. And then, it's a national lab. So we thought, hey, what's happening now? There's something, people keep getting hacked. How do we look into it? So CERT started up a forensics team. So digital forensics back in 2008 wasn't a field yet. So we started a forensics team, and we worked on some really amazing things and worked with the Secret Service, worked on the NASDAQ hack, the Home Depot hack. And what was coolest to me, the Target hack. Because as I've been doing security at that point for a good 15 years, my parents still had no idea what I did. But Target got hacked, and my mom was like, do I need a new credit card?
Yeah.
Yes, you do.
What person in the United States is not interested in Target?
Yeah.
I mean, especially that demographic, any woman over the age of 25 is interested in what's happening at Target.
It's called Target for a reason.
Yeah, if they build a Target here in Cache Valley, people would go nuts. So yeah, everybody loves Target. So that got your parents' attention.
Yes, finally.
Now, for those of you, I mean, my background is more kind of like statistics and data science. I wouldn't profess to be a cybersecurity expert. When you work, we're so excited that we have a cybersecurity component in our department, and there's actually a strong connection between data analytics, data science, and cybersecurity. And it's so great to work with people in cybersecurity. It's full of acronyms.
So many.
So he's already used like 5. That he just kind of, and one of those, I don't want to overlook it for a second because you guys all take it for granted in cybersecurity, but CERT, C-E-R-T, Computer Emergency Response Team. That started at Carnegie Mellon, back in the late 80s. That's the first time that was used, but they, kind of like McDonald's, Carnegie Mellon franchises CERT out now to
Well, they trademarked CERT.
Yeah.
So no longer are they the Computer Emergency Response Team. They're just CERT. But it did start a footprint that's used by everyone else. There's CERTs there's ICS CERT for industrial control systems. Each country has a CERT. It would sort of set the ground. And as you mentioned, analytics. Earlier I mentioned, we look at 14% of all internet traffic with this tool called Silk. You're not doing that without some math, right? So we need people to write the analytics that can actually find that needle in the haystack and can define what normal is to look what abnormal is, right? So I'm sure when people started mining Bitcoin, how many times did the IS team find Bitcoin miners on campus networks and turn them off, right? So that's a needle in a haystack, and you're not going to do that by just looking at a report. You're going to have to figure out what's normal, what's abnormal, and look for the oddities and track that down.
Yeah, and so we're excited kind of about the future of our department because this is a connection that we're really building with our focus on data analytics and cybersecurity. But Joe, let's get into some of the cloak and dagger stuff that you've been in your life because Joe, you could seriously make a very exciting movie about Joe's life. Joe recommended a book to me that I read that I just finished reading. It's a book called Kingpin. And I think it's Kevin Poulsen.
Kevin Poulsen, a hacker who got one of the first ones that got caught before Kevin Mitnick. So if you read Kevin Mitnick's book, he throws a lot of shade at Kevin Poulsen.
There's a big competitive spirit, and the thing that's so fascinating about the history of hacking is that there's a lot of like fluidity, I guess I'd say, between the white hat and the black hat kind of hacking. You know, black hat is the malicious, white hat is where, you know, people are trying to protect, you know, people and organizations. There's certainly a revolving door there.
Yes.
And anybody from Meridian, Idaho? Anybody from Boise? Nobody from Boise? Anybody from Idaho? Okay, well, we got a few. This is a fascinating story in this book, Kingpin, because this was a guy who came from Meridian, Idaho, who manufactured the biggest credit card hack up to that point of all time.
Yeah,
it was pretty amazing.
I think it was like 145 million credit cards. It was a combination of technical and social engineering and hacking. It was quite amazing what this. Well, so if you're fortunate, I can't recognize everybody who's taken my IS 3800 class, but you've read it if you're in that class. I force you to read that, or I force you to read The Cuckoo's Egg. But yeah, he was definitely an interesting hacker because he ran it like a business. He hired people to help him hack and ended up taking down other hackers and getting all their data and sort of cornering the market on credit cards.
He consolidated the business, basically. I mean, kind of like, you know, an Amazon or something like that. Like, he consolidated this criminal activity under one, almost like a corporate,
Yes.
in a corporate structure.
It was vertically integrated. He was even getting his own credit card printing machines and printing cards with the stolen information and selling those.
So his name is Max Butler. Again, he came from the Boise area. That's where he grew up. He ended up down in Silicon Valley. You know, as Silicon Valley was really starting to ramp up. He had a bunch of different aliases and usernames and so on, but his favorite, I think, was Max Vision.
And
Sounds like a wrestler name or something, but
And to be clear, if you read the book, Max Butler is a garbage human being, and there's nothing endearing about him, and no one should look up to him. But and it's good that he did get the longest jail sentence of any hacker to date. So yeah, he was a bad person, and you'll often hear people say, "What if they just use their skills for good?" No, I don't believe it. Like, it's easy to do things the wrong way. You don't build something that's going to last and be great if you're taking shortcuts everywhere. That's kind of what the hackers do, which is also why we caught him.
because the first time he actually was jailed, which was before that, many years before that, it was, my understanding, it was the result of a hack that he made that he felt was virtuous.
Yes.
Because it was planning some code in systems that would fix holes, but at the same time, it gave him access to all of those systems.
He fixed
So there
one
was
problem.
both sides.
Yeah, he fixed one problem and then put a back door in while he was fixing it.
Then he got put in jail for that for a little bit, but that was chump change compared to what happened later.
Yeah. Let's also not forget the domestic abuse. So he was a bad person.
And that, no shade on Idaho at all.
Great potatoes.
It wasn't based on his experience, though. But so this is kind of where Joe comes into the story, because the story is really fascinating. This is what I read in Kingpin, and Joe has kind of set me straight, because the details are actually a little more, I would say, exhilarating than Kingpin kind of lets on. I'm just going to summarize this in brief, and then you tell us what really happened, because you might think that the life of somebody who's, in cybersecurity is, sitting there pecking away like a troll in a dark room somewhere. And there's probably some of that.
Some Mr. Robot.
But yeah, there are also life-threatening incidents. So here's what happened. Max Vision / Butler was in his apartment, I guess in the San Francisco area, right? Now, at the time, you were part of the research team at Carnegie Mellon. This is probably like 2008-ish.
Yeah.
Okay. So you might wonder, well, why would the Secret Service be involved in stuff like this? And that is an interesting question. You think the Secret Service, they're just there to kind of protect the president, of the United States. But they have a big profile in cybersecurity as well.
So they first got brought in to detect counterfeit bills, but then later it sort of expanded. They're also in charge of protecting the economy. So hacking is a big part of the economy. So what we did at CERT is we had people from the FBI and Secret Service stationed in our team so we could work with them because they have the knowledge to find a criminal in the real world, but sometimes it doesn't transfer over to the cyber world. So we would bridge that gap for them.
Yeah. So it was super interesting. I didn't realize that, until relatively recently. But they, just needless to say, I mean, you can read more details and accounts of this whole experience, but the Secret Service and the FBI homed in on Max Butler where he was in San Francisco. But here's the kicker. Because he had all of his data encrypted. And he also had kind of like a kill switch. So he was really confident. In fact, so cocky, Joe has told me that in internet forums where they were kind of posing so they could monitor what he was saying in these kind of like dark web forums, right? He was bragging, about how he was untouchable. Nobody could ever get him. And he had caused like just massive amounts of loss and fraud just by stealing credit cards and selling them. In fact, what did he call his business? Like Card Market or something like that?
Carter's Forum, I think it was called.
Yeah,
or Carter's Market. Yeah.
It was like a business. So people on the dark web could just get on there and order batches of cards and so on. So people's information was just being distributed and part of these transactions and so on. So he's in his apartment, and he has this massive rack of servers. It's all encrypted, so he feels like, look, if somebody comes for me and knocks on the door, I'm just going to hit the kill switch. And it turns out that if something is encrypted, you can try to break the code as long as it's still running, right? As long as it's still in memory. But if somebody kills it, you're done. And so you were part of a team sitting outside of this apartment when the Secret Service agents were about to storm it. He's with a couple of other nerds in the car. So they could sweep him in and get Max Butler at the moment that he could not reach the kill switch. That was the key. So tell him what happened.
So because he had bragged in the forum that he had this kill switch, and at the time, we were very proud of it. We had 200 servers, all with these special video cards, which now is what we use for AI, to try to crack passwords. But it worked like 1 in 10 times, and we were too scared with Max that it wouldn't work. So the Secret Service got a no-knock warrant, meaning they could go in unannounced. But there were conditions from the judge, and that was that we had a thermal imaging camera that would show him typing when we were engaging with him in the chat. Then we also
This is cybersecurity, folks.
We also had a radio antenna to show that there were bits going across Wi-Fi when he was typing. The judge was like, we don't do this. This is part of the U.S. laws. That you can't just, what is it, unreasonable search and seizure. So we engaged him. They saw him on the thermal imaging camera go into the shower. Because the Secret Service told us naked people don't resist. So they
I always remain clothed, so I'm ready to resist.
If you're an Arrested Development fan, he's a never dude. So they actually don't break down the door. They go in the door, they arrest him, and now we have to take his little rack of servers and go back and image them so we can analyze it. But we couldn't turn them off, and we had to get them out of there. So we actually cut the outlet out of the wall. Then we plugged power back into it, and then with big insulated clippers, we cut the power. We all practiced this in the lab quite a bit of times beforehand. It worked. We imaged it. We found a bunch of information, including that he had buried $1 million in his mom's backyard. Because he said, if I got caught, it's no big deal, because when I get out, I've got all this money. So the Secret Service dug that up. And so he goes to jail. He gets the longest sentence of any cyber criminal.
I think it was like 13 years, right?
Yes. And then this keeps happening. So we go on to the next. Can we talk about NASDAQ?
Yeah, please.
So NASDAQ was the next big hack. So everybody knows what NASDAQ is, right? So NASDAQ had gotten hacked. And they got hacked, and this is where I want everybody here to think about this. They got hacked really easily. There was like a forum you could go into, and you could upload images, and CEOs could talk to each other. And there was this special trusted NASDAQ platform. Somebody uploaded an image, but found out when the image is uploaded, it's just executed as code. So an attacker uploaded a backdoor. And then for quite a bit of time, exfiltrated, so pulled data out for months, And this is like 2011. So they were pulling like 16 gigs of data, which at the time was crazy, but now your phone has way more data than that. But anyhow, it was crazy at the time. So we go in, and we're looking. The other thing we had to do was we couldn't tell anybody that we were doing this, because this was 2 weeks before Christmas, and they didn't want an issue to go out and the stock market to tank, because they wanted people to spend money. Now, mind you, at this point, I was going to grad school. So I was working full time and going to grad school, and I had a Java final, and I did not want to take it.
This is all happening when he's studying for a Java final.
So
by the way.
I get a call from the FBI
You guys
person.
think you're busy. But anyway, go ahead.
And the FBI agent calls me saying, hey, Joe, we need to come to New York. I'm like, well, that's cool, but I'm not the person who makes this decision. So I call somebody else, and they call back saying, we're going to go to New York tonight. We're renting a van, and we're driving to New York from Pittsburgh. And so I email my professor. Sorry, I can't take my final because of the FBI. But I don't think he had heard before.
Which is a very effective excuse, by the way. I just want to say, if you're trying to get out of a final.
Yeah, so we go there, and the special agent in charge, an incredibly nice lady from New York, it's like, does anybody need me to email their spouse or anything? You know, let them know you're doing all these long hours. It's like, excuse me, can you email my professor? So he emails my professor, and he finds out I didn't have to take the final. Yes. And I've never coded Java since. So do everything in Python, so much better. Okay, anyhow. So we are there. We are looking for data. At this point, we don't know, like, it is just, the virus is everywhere. It is in every Active Directory domain controller. And we're also finding, like, there's multiple threat actors. So multiple hackers are in here. We're like, what is going, this is ridiculous, right? So we fix the one, we find the others. Now I'm at the FBI office giving my briefing. Briefing is over, and the agent says to me, Chris, they're in the network. I'm like, well, it's Joe, but whatever. I'm like, let me open my laptop, no problem. He's like, no, let's go. I'm like, no, I can get this from my laptop. So this is where, at the time, the agents didn't understand what cyber was, right? They're like, let's go. I'm like, it doesn't, I'll be quicker. Like, so we go out to his unmarked car, and I got in the back seat, and there's like boxes of bullets like on the seats, but it's just like a movie. He puts his lights on, he's flying. Like the boxes are flying back and forth. I'm like, I can do this. I'm like, okay. He's on the sidewalk. He pulls up to the front of the NASDAQ, like skids. He like runs out to the door. I'm like, let me just grab my bag. Like the guy was gone. But there was so much interesting stuff. But the trading platform was completely unaffected because they had something really cool. So I haven't seen the computers in the different offices here, but when they get old, usually they're beige. When they get old, they get thrown out, right? But NASDAQ was really great. They got all the old computers, took the hard drives out, and every 4 hours they just re-imaged them off of a gold standard. So the virus could never get into the trading platform because that image was immutable. You couldn't modify it without triggering alarms. So the trading platform was fine, but everything else was a hot mess. They had to buy all new equipment and build an entirely new network, complete, so we say air-gapped, but it just means completely separate from what they had. And they were so unsure of what the virus was, it wasn't quite as big at the time, they threw the other equipment out because they were afraid that it was at the firmware level. But what I want to bring out this, they were compromised multiple times. So through the website, so everybody's going to build a web app of some sort at some point. You're going to work at a company that's doing something web because this is 2023 and this is how things happen. Your mobile app, whatever. They were compromised in something that we had known was bad for like the last 10 years. So like the simple stuff you should be thinking about, even though you see new hacks in the news and new hacks in different trade magazines, it comes back to the fundamentals. So when you're home, Logan seems like a really nice place, really, but I'm sure you still like lock the front door when you leave, right? Because you don't want people to break in. And you have to do the cyber equivalent of that. You have to keep locking the doors and locking the windows because people aren't. And the same mistakes keep happening again. So they were compromised this one way, but then they were also compromised 3 other ways. And it's just, but none of it was things that were like cutting edge. It was the simple things that everybody could have noticed. One person was phished, and that's how they got that back door on the website. A system administrator had been phished, and that's how they got control of the Active Directory, because they just went to LinkedIn and looked for system administrator, and they found Eric, and they know that Eric's passed. Eric's easy to fish, We know that he wants to look at anything related to the Utah Jazz, right? So I fished him with a chance for that. So all these things, like everybody makes the same mistakes, and we, as no matter what part of the business you are, you can think about it and be aware of cyber and just kind of think like, well, does this seem right? And just be a little skeptical. I mean, don't be paranoid, because that's no way to live, right? Just be like, I don't know, would I do this, right? Okay, who here is a snowboarder? Okay, who's a mountain biker? Rock climber? Okay, so you all know about risk, right? And before you're gonna launch off that jump, you're gonna look at the landing, right? And that's kind of what you wanna do with cyber. You have to take a risk, because your website needs to be online. But just, okay, well, how can you make the landing better, right? What controls can you put in place? How can you educate people in the company to think about security, right? And not send, not get phished and send a big payment to your supplier to the wrong company.
Yeah, thanks. That actually kind of does that does suggest kind of a question, and I know that this does sound kind of rhetorical because I think everybody knows what the answer is going to be. But there are a lot of students here who are from represent IS and data analytics, but there are students here who are in accounting. There are students here who are in human resources. They're in operations. They're in marketing. They're in finance. What do they need to know about this domain? Because I think it's fair to say that most people who work in parts of an organization or company don't really even think about this.
Well, that's a good.
But what would you say to students who across all of these disciplines about why they need to be kind of cyber aware and what they need to do to be prepared?
So one thing I do at all of the companies that I work at is I do a monthly security and privacy coffee talk. I invite the whole company, and we talk about something from the headlines. Because security is everybody, right? Like, I can put in all these controls and make things harder to use, but you don't want that, right? You want to keep things agile. When you're, as part of security, I have to make sure that the business can keep running, that I don't slow people down. Back in the day, security used to be a roadblock. You're like, Chris, you can't start a new program up. You can't have a new class because there's risk. And that was accepted, but that no longer is. I have to have Chris come to me with whatever crazy idea it is, say, awesome, let's just figure out how to do it securely. So I want everybody to know that they have an ally in security. You can help them, you can make them move faster, you can tell them that security makes things more reliable, more scalable, and work with that. But also, that just simple things keep you secure. So everybody is always gonna have multi-factor auth turned on. So that's when you get that text message or that email or use an app that makes you have more than just a password, right? Because passwords get compromised. I know that half the people here, passwords are their dog's name, right? So you don't want that. It's not my dog's names, although my dog's names are an extra credit question on all of my exams. But you have to have multi-factor auth. You have to make sure that you, as people with laptops, you do your updates, right? That you don't click on weird links, that you're a little skeptical, right? It's just, if you're in accounting, if you see something odd, the big thing we see, it's Friday afternoon, somebody who appears to be the CEO is sending you an email, why aren't you paying this bill? We're late. But it's fake, right? But because there's that sense of urgency from the CEO, people just send the money. This happens over and over. In 2018, the chair of the SEC said that this was one of the #1 risks to companies at the time. So 8 companies accounted for $100 million in losses from this type of scam, where the fake CEO sends an email. So be skeptical of that. If you're in marketing, well, data, as they say, is the new oil, right? So information about, I know that, that Eric looks for Utah Jazz stuff, and I know that Chris is a runner, so if I can get information about him to target ads towards him, that's useful. That data is valuable, and you can sell it. But you have to be responsible with how you sell it to stay out of the headlines, right? You don't want to be Facebook and Cambridge Analytica. So you have to just think about how you do things securely, and that's what all of you are. Just think, what is this the right way to do things?
Yeah, in fact, that reminds me, there have been some cases where companies have been sued or fined. Can you give us a couple of examples? Because this, obviously, when you're part of a business, you want to make sure that it remains profitable. You don't want to incur that kind of liability. But there have been a couple of recent cases where companies have actually been held liable for their inability to protect information.
So there's like a couple big examples here. So just SolarWinds was this company that makes a monitoring software that's used by a lot of people. It was compromised, and the SEC is actually suing the CEO and the CISO, saying they were negligent. Then you've got a company like Twitter. So Twitter got people's phone numbers to provide that authentication. They'll send you a message to log in, but then they were using that phone number to send you targeted texts. Hey, advertising texts. And that was sort of a misuse. Then you've got Facebook and Cambridge Analytica. So if you remember what happened with the 2016 election, Cambridge Analytica was paying for data from Facebook. But what they were actually doing is they found out there was a flaw in Facebook's data feed, and they can get information about not only who was paying, but or not only the data they were paying for, but everybody in the network and all of their information. And then they used that because they were paid by Russia to actually do really. They were targeting both Democrats and Republicans with specific ads to build mistrust and to get people to vote specific ways. But they didn't really care about who won. What they wanted to do was create this culture of distrust and then have our economy start to tank because of the sort of division that they've created. So Cambridge Analytica and Facebook's a really big example of that.
Yeah, thanks.